We'll wrap up our Week 3 videos by using our finance data to introduce you to some analytics features that you can add to your charts. These features allow you to supplement your existing data with trend lines, constant lines, and even some rudimentary forecasting. We'll start with a brand new page in Power BI Desktop, and you can see I've already added a year slicer to the page and a line chart. If we look at the line chart, it has our date column on the x-axis and the expenses YTD measure along the y-axis. You can already see some trends developing for our expenses, like a big expense at the start of each month, which is probably our mortgage payment. Then obviously we have our huge June expense for home remodeling. On our visualizations pane, next to the format settings, is our analytics settings. This logo looks like a magnifying glass that's hovering over a chart. If we click it, we should see several options listed out, like trend line, constant line, min, max, average, median, percentile line, and forecast. Let's start with a basic trend line. This particular feature will add a dashed line to our chart that roughly tracks the progression of our expenses from the earliest date to the latest date. We'll click the Add button, and Power BI will automatically add a black line. Now, we should note that the measure we're using here is a year-to-date measure, meaning it's cumulative, or a running total. The trend for this is almost always going to head upward because that's what cumulative means. But I still want to point out what a trend line looks like. Constant lines appear similar to trend lines, but they don't change over time. That's why they're called constant. It's just a static line that you can add to your chart to function as a reference point. We'll add one to our chart. Then we'll double click on the name to rename it, and we'll call it Cool Constant. Then we'll set the value to 15,000. Change the color to orange. And then we'll add a data label, and we'll tell that label to just use the name and value. Then when we look back at our chart, we'll see we have this, and then when we look back at our chart, we'll see this orange constant line that has been superimposed on our chart along with its name and value. Let's do a few more examples, but first let's remove our constant line and the trend line because our chart is about to get very cluttered. All right, so now let's add our budget amount YTD measure to the chart. Then let's shade it gray. So it doesn't stand out as much as the expenses measure. And notice how the budget amount increases at the start of each month. And notice how our chart's x-axis now looks forward all the way to the end of the year and doesn't just stop at September. But we still only have expenses through the end of September. Now let's add a max line to our chart this time by going back to the analytics settings. This line will give us a ceiling for our data by returning a horizontal line that shows the maximum value of whatever measure we give it. Once we've added that line, we see that Power BI is defaulted to our expenses YTD measure. So let's open the drop-down menu and change it to our budget amount measure. Power BI is now calculating the max of our year-to-date budget and overlaying that as the dashed line on our chart. I like this visual because it creates that sense of a ceiling for our budget. And we can now see that our expenses are getting ready to break through that ceiling. We're getting really close to exceeding our budget. Now let's do one more analytics feature, which is forecast. So to do that one, we're going to remove our max line. We also need to remove the budget amount YTD measure because you can only do forecast with one measure at a time. Go back to analytics, go to forecast, and hit add. Then what we'll do is we'll give it a forecast length of 3 months and then click apply. That will take us through the end of the calendar year. So what this is doing is the gray shaded area just gives us an idea, according to Power BI, of where our potential expenses year to date could go based on where they've been so far this year. And it's a pretty broad area. You notice the black line indicates it's a likely trend upward, but the gray area just gives a big confidence interval so that Power BI can say you are likely to be within this range. Now, this is probably not a very sophisticated forecast. For one thing, our expenses measure is cumulative, so it is going to go up more than likely. This is probably not a very sophisticated forecast because our expenses measure is cumulative. It is going to go up. So I don't think the shaded area could ever go down like it does. But again, this is Power BI just giving us a confidence interval saying that the values are going to be almost certainly within with a 95% confidence going to be within this range. But the visual still looks very interesting, so I wanted to showcase it. So maybe with a different data set, this could probably be even more insightful for us. But that's the analytics features in Power BI using line charts. I think they're very cool and a great way to add a little bit of analytical flavor to your charts.
That's it for our week 3 videos. We covered a lot of ground. Date tables, calculated columns, calculated tables, time intelligence functions, some new Power Query transformations, and these analytics functions we just talked about. We're almost done with the course. In week 4, we'll introduce you to the Power BI service and mobile reporting.